Hello, my name is Hallie Galt, and I have been chosen from my talented team of consultants to be the presenter. My team of consultants was assigned to assess the episode of Kitchen Nightmares featuring Lela's, a fine dining restaurant in Pomona, California. For this project, we were asked to identify the communication problems and provide solutions to them for this struggling restaurant. In order to identify the issues at Lela's, my team watched the episode of Kitchen Nightmares that they were featured on to find a little bit of background information about what was really going on behind the scenes. We made some assessments and gathered information from the episode, and here's what we found. At the beginning of the episode, we see Gordon arrive at Lela's. On his first day there, when he is there to assess the food, he realized that many of the menu options are missing. When he asks the waitress why they don't have them, she simply says she doesn't know, but they don't have them, therefore she cannot serve them to him. Of the items that they do have, he realizes that they are all frozen, although the restaurant claims to be fine dining and boasts fresh food. On top of all of this, there is conflict in the kitchen that can be heard in the front of the restaurant because the sous chef and the head chef fight very loudly. After a rough first day at Lela's, on Gordon's second day at the restaurant, he finds even more problems, such as a freezer that is not maintained and full of rotting food, and it lacks cleanliness. He also discovers that there is a lack of leadership within the restaurant and that all of Lela's employees are generally lazy. Not only this, but he discovers that the employees refer to one of the sous chefs as Buzzard because he is constantly eating food within the kitchen. On Gordon's third day at Lela's, he informs Lela that not only has Buzzard been having food from the kitchen while he's working, but he has also been taking food home without her permission. In light of this, Lela decides to dismiss Buzzard from his position. After this is taken care of, Gordon holds a little contest between the sous chef and head chef to decide who should really be in charge of the kitchen. After addressing some of the more glaring issues within the restaurant, Gordon spends his fourth day at Lela's focusing on their menu. On that day, he decides to challenge the chefs to create a new salad for Lela's menu, and he shows them how to make a perfect burger that'll make Lela's famous. After they make the burger, he takes a few of the employees out into the community of Pomona and has them advertise it to attract new customers. After a day of advertising within the community, Gordon gathers the employees to get them ready for the relaunch of the new Lela's that will be taking place the next day. On the night of Lela's relaunch, Lela and her employees are shown a transformed version of their restaurant, featuring a beautiful new interior and a line of excited customers out the door. But their excitement doesn't last long, as the kitchen can't keep up and food is not being sent to everyone at a table at the same time. And their frustrated staff members continue to take breaks during their busiest and most important dinner service ever. After watching the relaunch get off to a very rocky start, Lela finally decided to assert her role as a boss and walked into the kitchen and told Chef Lex that if he couldn't handle the heat, then he needed to get out of the kitchen. Then, Chef Ricky finally decided to take control of the kitchen and got food out to the customers. Although some customers had waited for over 30 minutes to receive their meals, they said that the food was worth the wait and that they would gladly return to Lela's. Although relaunch night started out as a disaster, it turned out to be very successful for Lela's. After Gordon's time at Lela's, some of the positive outcomes included Chef Ricky deciding to take his role seriously and improve his cooking skills. while head waitress Tabitha took on her role as manager of the front of the restaurant. Lela finally asserted her role as the leader and learned how to become a boss, allowing Lela's to turn a profit for the first time in 8 months. But unfortunately, Lela's was unable to overcome their debt, and the restaurant had to close 5 months after filming. After assessing Lela's episode of Kitchen Nightmares, my team and I discovered that while the restaurant needed Gordon Ramsay to rescue their menu, what they truly needed was a lesson in proper communication to have made Lela's a successful restaurant. One of the main problems which Lela's faced over and over again was a lack of authority. Lela, as a boss, really didn't take her job very seriously as a boss. She did not take on a role that instructed her employees and was rather apathetic about their poor work performance. She was very uninformed as to what was going on in the kitchen and was often uninformed about the conflicts between the kitchen and the front of the house members. It was a very, very poorly managed situation, and she didn't fulfill her role as a boss and take control of the situation and guide her employees and correct them, and that led to a lot of the other problems that you will see pop up on this list. Because of Lela's general lack of authority, there was also a very serious leadership problem within Lela's. As a boss, Lela should have led by example to show her employees how that they should lead themselves in their jobs and how they should lead as head chef or head waitress. But unfortunately, because she was not there to lead by example, Lela's head chef Ricky and head waitress Tabitha had no idea what they were supposed to be doing. This translated into very poor performance because there was no one instructing anybody. And really the whole leadership situation inside of Lela's was a bit of a free-for-all and often resulted in a screaming match, which brings us to conflicts that result in yelling. The problem with this is that when you have a situation where no one has any real authority, people tend to believe that if they can talk the loudest, they have the most authority. And this is really what was happening here when we see the yelling, heated arguments between Tabitha and Ricky. Neither of them really knew who had the authority, and neither of them really knew who was the real leader. So often they would scream at each other until the other one would give in. Unfortunately, everyone in the restaurant could hear this, and that kind of set a bad morale and a bad tone for the rest of the staff because they were like, well, if they don't know what we're doing, then we don't know what we're doing. So you had a whole chain that went from lack of authority, lack of leadership, and it resulted in conflicts that always ended in yelling. And it created a very, very poor atmosphere for anyone dining because no one wants to hear screaming matches in the kitchen while they're trying to enjoy their food. Due to all of the screaming and yelling that happened between Ricky and Tabitha, there was never really any calm or clear communication between the kitchen and the front of the house staff or the wait staff. So what this led to was a complete lack of any information that would translate from the kitchen to the wait staff. Where you see this present a real problem is like the situation where we saw Gordon order certain things off the menu and Tabitha, not knowing that they were unavailable because she hadn't communicated with Ricky, says, "Oh, okay, I'll go get this for you." And she goes back to the kitchen and is informed that they don't have that today, which then results in another screaming match between her and Ricky because that was not communicated in the first place, and the whole issue with the customer could have been avoided if that issue was communicated in the first place. Another issue which is created by this poor communication is the buildup between the kitchen and the wait staff. Because every time they try to communicate, it ends in screaming or a fight. Over time, there tends to be zero communication because one party does not want to have a screaming fight with the other party. The last problem which my team of consultants identified was that too many employees at Leela's were serving dysfunctional roles by being blockers, attackers, recognition seekers, jokers, and withdrawers. Although Leela's is no longer in business, if my team and I had been asked to come in before the restaurant closed and propose solutions to the communications issues at Leela's, there are a few ways we would have suggested tackling some of the issues that they faced. The first issue which my team of consultants would have addressed would be the lack of authority at Leela's and how to regain that authority. One of the ways which Lela could have done this would have been to have educated her staff on proper communication. In doing that, Lela could have explained to her staff that the way to go about problems that arose in the restaurant would not be to scream at one another, but to talk about those issues. By doing that and by educating her staff, Lela would have asserted her role as the boss. And if Lela would have learned to have assert her role as the boss, there would have been a lot less conflict, because instead of there, being issues between the kitchen and the wait staff, constantly not knowing who was right and who was wrong, if all of the issues could have been brought to Lela, she could have taken the next step in regaining authority by addressing those issues among staff members and resolving them calmly instead of them resulting in a screaming match for her guests who were dining to hear. The next problem that Leela's faced, which really needed to be solved, was the extreme lack of leadership. One of the ways that Lela could have fixed this problem would be by exhibiting leadership, by really taking charge of her role as a boss and making sure that her employees knew how a leader was supposed to conduct themselves and how they were supposed to look. She could have shared the goals of her restaurant and her business with her employees and, informed them that these goals needed to be accomplished. And she could have really asserted that authority and made sure that her business was being directed and that she was being recognized as a leader and that she was really in control of the situation. She could have shown her employees the areas where they needed to improve and really offer them constructive criticism as a leader instead of allowing other staff members to really bicker with one another and tear each other down instead of offering each other constructive criticism. Another area where Leela's entire staff really needed to improve would be resolving conflicts. As we saw in the episode, there was a constant conflict between, Tabitha and Ricky, and not just them, but the entire kitchen staff and the entire wait staff constantly being at odds with one another. One of the ways which Lela could have really stepped in and helped resolve these conflicts would be to really just monitor the egos of each team member and remind them that although they were important and that their jobs did matter, that she was the boss and she was going to make sure how things were going to go. And she could have limited biases between kitchen staff and wait staff and made sure that they weren't constantly butting heads as, this team against this team. And she could have really made sure that they were a unified team, all working towards making Leela's a really successful restaurant. And one of the ways which she could have done this would be implementing communication strategies by having meetings between the kitchen staff and the wait staff before service to make sure that all the employees were on the same page for the day and prevent a lot of the conflicts from happening in the first place. As I have mentioned, my team and I really discovered that the main problem Leela's faced was improper communication. And the way to solve that problem would really quite simply be to properly communicate and to make sure that conflicts between the kitchen and wait staff were being resolved. Again, through having meetings and making sure that all of the information within the kitchen was being communicated to the wait staff, and the wait staff was letting the kitchen know what's going on in the front of the house so that there wasn't such a divide between the two. And that would really establish more of a team atmosphere. And by establishing goals and tasks that belong to each staff member, there would have been a lot less confusion and there would have been a better work turnout because no one would be as confused, not knowing what they're really, supposed to do. There wouldn't have been so much conflict between a sous chef and a head chef had there really been proper communication as to whose job was whose. And I think lastly, what Lela could really benefit from, Leela's could really benefit from, and any business could benefit from, would be providing and requesting feedback from their employees. So as an employer, to let your employees know what areas of their job they're doing well in and what areas they need improvement in. And they can also, provide that feedback to each other in a constructive way instead of having constant conflict. The last issue which my team and I discovered within Leela's was that there were far too many dysfunctional roles being served. And the way to really solve that problem is to make sure that these dysfunctional roles are removed. So these roles of the blocker, attacker, recognition seeker, joker, and withdrawer can really all be combated by making sure that all employees have shared goals. Because if you make sure that everyone's working towards the same goal, then you usually find that there's less blocking and attacking because everyone's working towards the same idea. And by reiterating the importance of all staff members, you could really combat people who are constantly seeking recognition by making sure that everyone knows that all employees are important and that one employee doesn't really deserve any more recognition than any other. And lastly, by really establishing the responsibilities of each staff member, I think you could break the role of the withdrawer. And I think Lela was really the biggest withdrawer in this situation because she was walking away from her work instead of really stepping in as a boss and making sure that all of her employees were serving functional roles instead of dysfunctional roles. To recap my team's assignment, we were given Leela's episode of Kitchen Nightmares to assess and identify the communication issues which they faced and to provide Leela's with solutions to these problems. Although Leela's improved greatly with assistance from none other than Gordon Ramsay himself, they could have also really benefited from addressing the issues which my team of qualified consultants and I have pointed out. While Leela's had many issues, ranging from employees who were stealing to too many cooks in the kitchen and having an inept owner, their problems really boil down to a lack of authority, a lack of leadership, having too many heated conflicts, and there being zero communication between their kitchen and wait staff, and too many employees serving dysfunctional roles. And the common denominator of these problems is miscommunication. Communication is the lifeblood of any business, and poor communication will cause even the strongest of companies to crumble. So remember that in every situation, communication is key.